Hey everybody, Dr. Dan here. Welcome back. So this video is really important because this is actually for chapter 12, which is week 4, and I'm going to go through the quiz that you're going to have, and I'm basically going to give you the quiz answers. So you need to watch this all the way through, and I'll try to get through it as quickly as I can and pull relevant things out. And as I look away at my camera, I'm going to be looking at the quiz on another screen so I can kind of guide myself on what to tell you to look for. Okay, so that's the way this is going to go, and I'm long-winded. I'll try to keep it as short as possible. So the first thing I want to do, though, is I'm on chapter 11. I'm like on the last page of chapter 11, and we were talking about, I think in the intro, just briefly about primary sources, and there's a few primary source exercises. And for those of you who aren't clear on what a primary source is, it's what historians use to learn about history. So if you go into the archive of the Spanish government, for example, and you go way back as far as you can go back, you might learn about the trade practices of Spain, for example. So it sounds kind of boring, but it's what historians do. But the point is, it's not just texts or like documents that historians look at. We also interpret things from art. And since you are your first or second year in college, you've had this before in high school, how we can look at coins and money and pictures and songs and poems and sort of derive what was going on at the time. And so it's no different with art. And I just wanted to point this one out because this is a painting from Spain, and it shows these two unfortunate gentlemen being burned at the stake or about to be burned at the stake as heretics, and the people watching over up in the balcony, if you will, watching this all happen are the Dominican authorities, the high authorities in the Catholics, right, the Dominican branch in Spain, and they're burning these gentlemen at the stake as heretics. In other words, maybe they don't totally toe the line on everything the Dominicans believed in, but it's kind of cool because you can look back at a painting and say, hey, I don't have a document or a text, but they were burning these guys, and the guys looking on looked like authorities from the church, so therefore you can make some assumptions. So it's just one way historians use things other than text to find out what's going on. All right, so let's get down to business. Chapter 12. Contact, commerce, and colonization, probably one of my favorite chapters because I think, the whole world's built on commerce and trade. That's what we're all about. It defines us, really. Material goods define us, and foods from all over the world and devices from all over the world to this day really define who we are. So when you think about how it all started, it's pretty fascinating because, no philosophers were thinking in terms of economic philosophy really until Adam Smith comes along, like I think in the next chapter, maybe in this chapter, but it's a whole new world. And as I said before, when we were in chapter 10, the first chapter, and I was talking about the new technologies and how they allowed for the shipping of freight to these different places, and how sea travel was more efficient than land travel. When I was talking about all of that stuff, it was in this idea of commerce building up. So now we get to the 1450s, the 1600s, and commerce is going crazy. Unfortunately, the slave trade is going to go crazy also, or at least start up. So we're going to look at the Atlantic because that's where that happens. But let's just dig in, and I'm going to go through the quiz questions, and I'll try not to go on and on as I always do. I get excited about this stuff, so what can I tell you? So, back in the 1400s, when Christopher Columbus was, 1492 sailing the ocean blue, the leader, like the big dominant superpower in the world was the Ottoman Empire, which is this area spanning, all over around the Mediterranean and Turkey and the Middle East, okay? So it was huge, and one of the problems with that was that the Ottoman Empire, the Muslims, that were in Turkey, controlled the Bosphorus Straits. So it was a main trading route. If you were in Europe and you wanted to go to China to get stuff via land, you had to go through Turkey and or Afghanistan, but there were no good routes, so you had to go through, and that was a problem because either the Muslims weren't going to let you through, or they were going to charge these duties, or you didn't want to deal with them if you were a European. So really one of the reasons that Columbus was motivated to find a shorter route to China, right, was because the land routes were harder to get to. So it's really important to understand that. It's not just, oh, we have this new ship, we're curious what happens when we get in the water. It's like, hey, we need to trade, we need to find a way around these guys, so let's go by sea. It's always follow the money. Where's the most profit at? And that's, Columbus was all about that, trying to find a shorter way. So, the Portuguese and the Spanish are really the people that kind of, go crazy and really, with Columbus's group, the Portuguese for sure go around the southern Cape of Africa, and they go up into India around Goa and these other areas very early on. And Columbus, of course, lands in Hispaniola and starts the whole Spanish takeover of Mexico, what is going to be Mexico. So that all happens in this chapter. There's a lot. Some cool maps here that are excellent. So if you like looking at the graphics, and this really talks about how the Ottoman Empire, all right, again, we're talking about really the Middle East, but really so much more than that, expanded throughout and was just this, incredible power, and the Ottomans coming into Europe. So again, blocking this expansion eastward by the Europeans and blocking trade to the east also. So they were quite the superpower, and that's why the Europeans said, hey, we got to go the other way. And here, this little video, this is another great historian. I think this video is 1 minute and 39 seconds. Too bad mine aren't that short, huh? And he talks about the fact that, hey, it's because that Europeans were blocked from going east that they went, they went west into the Atlantic to get to the other world. So, here's the famous map. So, but this is cool because it's got the years and when people were expanding and where they were going. So you can just see how big this expansion is. And again, more ships and the caravel and some of these sails all of a sudden where you could tack and sail literally against the wind. And then the discovery of sugar, and sugar is labor intensive. So the Portuguese figure out, hey, this slavery is a good deal, and they could easily go to Congo and get slaves. It was no problem. They were readily available for sale. So there's that part, and most of that story you probably know, but I think it's important to know. And there's a whole field of history called Atlantic history, and Atlantic history is cool because it really studies that trade, that Atlantic triangle of slaves going from Africa to the Americas, and then products going from the Americas back to Europe, mainly cotton. So sort of this circular pattern of slaves and goods going around in the Atlantic. So the Atlantic world, when they're talking about that, that's exactly what they're talking about, this trade thing. There's a picture of Columbus. Everybody looks happy. It didn't go well, but anyway, there's a neat thing in here about Columbus gives one of them a sword, and they cut their hands on it, the Tianos, the Indians, and they cut their hands on it because they've never felt steel. They didn't know anything about a sharp edge of steel or anything. So it kind of tells you the technological differential between the Europeans in 1492 and the indigenous people in the Americas. So first conquest, and then the Aztecs, all right? So the Aztec society centered around where Mexico City is today, a major big deal. And it was the first major kind of takeover in the Americas. And read about it, because if you don't know this story, it's great, and the textbook handles it very well. And you'll read about Montezuma, the main dude, but the person of interest here is Hernan Cortez, and he was a Spaniard, and he came over and he was going to take over. He was going to defeat Montezuma, defeat the Aztecs and get all this gold. They had tremendous amounts of gold. And so the Spanish were going crazy over it. And actually there's a question on the quiz about Donna Marina, who is the interpreter and eventually becomes Cortez's lover. And there's a question on the quiz about what she did. And she did a couple of things. But one of the best answers is she was a translator overall who just helped him get through to conquer the Aztecs. So think about that as you go through the quiz. And then, let's see, there's a question on the quiz about what I was just talking about, trying to find this shorter route. So that's one of the reasons that the Europeans went west to sail east, was because they couldn't get through by land, okay, because of the Muslim conquest of Constantinople, Istanbul. So anyway, there's that. And then we're going to go through the other really important part is you read about the Incas, that's in South America, but I want to get into, and there's the colonization, but I just want to move on. Okay, this is really important. So you're going to read about the Protestant Reformation, and I touched base on that, I think, in maybe chapter 10. But anyway, the church, the Christian church back then was Catholic. That was it. It was all Catholic, all right? And Martin Luther is the guy who came along, not Martin Luther King, that's way ahead of time, but Martin Luther is the guy who came along and challenged the Catholic Church by, he nailed up a document on the wall of a church, the 99 Theses, and what it basically said was that, hey, I don't need a go-between to worship, all right? I don't need a go-between to worship. I, as a layperson, can worship on my own. And I don't need to belong to this organized church. I can do my own thing. So it really is sort of the beginning of, Lutherans, and then eventually, way eventually, like Methodists and Baptists, but all these Christian denominations that are independent of the Catholic Church. And one of the things Martin Luther was against, and I think many of you know this, but maybe you didn't, the Catholic Church back then did a thing called selling of indulgences. And the deal was that if you sinned, you could go talk to your priest and say, "Oh my God, priest, I sinned. I ate baked beans on a Tuesday," or whatever it is. So I sinned, and if you want to get out of it and not feel guilty, you could pay the church. Okay, my son, that will be, if you give us $20, whatever it was back then, God will be okay. Jesus will be okay with you. And so that was called the selling of indulgences. It sounds crazy, but it's the way the Catholic Church made their money back way before Martin Luther, the selling of indulgences. So read this. It's not complicated, and it's really good background knowledge to help you understand, if you're not Catholic but you are Christian, sort of the roots of the church or wherever your parents went or whatever. So that's a big deal, and there's a question about that on the quiz. One of the reasons that Martin Luther wrote his 99 Theses is because he thought it was wrong that the Catholic Church was selling indulgences. There's the answer. So you got that one. The next question is about, and I think I should go backwards, but I don't need to. The next question on the quiz is about the effect of biology and the role it played in the European colonization of the New World. And I think you know that one. I think most of you know that Native Americans or indigenous people were killed off in great numbers because they didn't have immunity to European diseases. All right. So think COVID, only worse, but no cure, or no immunity, that kind of thing. So it wiped out a lot of indigenous people and Native Americans. And I think then again, that's something you learn all the way through, I don't know about elementary school, but all the way up through high school, not a new thing, but it's on the quiz, so answer that one. And then this one you probably didn't know about, but when you go back and read about the Americas, you're going to read about the growing of corn, okay? And, I don't know if you've ever tied together like corn and slavery, but we were talking about that Atlantic slave trade, and I'm sorry I'm going into 14 minutes, but corn from the Americas had a big impact on that, because one of the things that the Americas shipped back to Africa was corn, because Africa has needed grain and corn ever since, way back when, just because the climate is not friendly to growing that sort of thing, and there's a lot of people. So as more corn was shipped over in the 1300s, 1400s, the population of Africans expanded. So really, when the corn was shipped over, the slaves, the potential pool of possible slaves expanded because everyone had more to eat, nutrition was better, birth rate went up. So kind of a wild story, but read about that in here because it's something that most people don't know about, and there's a question about it on the quiz. How did corn from the Americas impact the Atlantic slave trade? And the answer is it increased African populations, providing more captives for the slave trade. So again, not a fun fact, but kind of interesting how how everything kind of goes in cycles sometimes, and you're not really aware of it. So that's it for me this week. The quiz is really easy. It's open book. Take your time. Don't guess. Because if you get it wrong, it's kind of a big deal in a 50-point quiz. You know, there's not that many of them. It's only 1,000 points for the whole class. So yeah, make sure you have your book open while you're doing your quiz or whatever, and it'll work out fine for you. So that's all I have for this week. I'm sorry this was so long. Good luck with the quiz. Have a great day. Be safe. Take care. See you next week. Bye-bye.